The political and economic centralization of India achieved by the British for the better exploitation and control of India inevitably led to the growth of national consciousness and the birth of the national movement. With the return of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi from South Africa in 1915 and his leadership of the Indian nationalist movement in 1919, the Indian nationalism entered a mass phase. The British destroyed the traditional basis of Indian land system. In the pre-British days, the land revenue was realized by sharing the actual crop with the cultivators. The British fixed the land revenue in cash without any regard to various contingencies such as failure of crops, fall in prices and droughts or floods. Moreover, the practice of sale and settlement of debt encouraged money lenders to advance money to landholders and resorting to every kind of trickery or to rob them of their property. There were also two other major implications of the new land settlements introduced by the East India Company. They institutionalized the commodification of land and commercialization of agriculture in India. As mentioned earlier, there was no private property in land in pre-British era. Now land became a commodity that could be transferred either by way of buying and selling or by way of the administration taking over land from holders in lieu of a default on payment of tax rent. Land taken over in such cases was auctioned off to another bidder. This created a new class of absentee landlords who lived in the cities and extracted revenue from the lands without actually living on the lands. In the traditional agriculture setup, the villagers produced largely for their consumption among themselves, and after the new land settlements, agriculture produce were predominantly for the market. The commodification of land and commercialization of agriculture did not improve the lives and conditions of peasants. Instead, this created discontent among the peasantry and made them restive. These peasants later on turned against the imperialists and their collaborators. Laissez-faire policy and deindustrialization impact on Indian artisans. The policy of the company, the wake of the industrial revolution in India, and England resulted in the deindustrialization of India. The war continued until the beginning of World War One. The British government pursued a policy of free trade or laissez-faire. Raw materials like cotton, jute, and silk from India were taken to Britain. The finished products made from those raw materials were then transported back to the Indian markets. Mass production, with the help of technological advancement, enabled them to flood the Indian market with their goods. It was available at a comparatively cheaper price than the Indian handloom cloth. Prior to the arrival of the British, India was known for its handloom products and handicrafts. It commanded a good world market. However, as a result of colonial policy, gradually Indian handloom products and handicrafts lost their market, domestic as well as international. Import of English articles into India through the weavers, cotton dressers, the carpenters, and shoemakers out of employment. India became a procurement of raw material, and farmers were forced to produce crops like indigo and gather cash crops like cotton for use in British practices. Due to the shift to subsistence agriculture, which was a mainstay for several hundred years, suffered, leading to food scarcity. The Indigo Revolt 1859 to 60 in Bengal was one of the responses from the Indian farmer to the oppressive policy of the British. The Indian tenants were forced to grow indigo by their planters, who were mostly Europeans. Used to dye the clothes, indigo was in high demand in Europe. Peasants were forced to accept meager amounts as advance and enter into unfair contracts. Once a peasant accepted the contract, he had no option but to grow indigo on his land. The price paid by the planter was far lower than the market price. Many a times the peasants could not even pay their land revenue dues. Hoping that the authorities would address their concerns, the peasants wrote several petitions to authorities and organized peaceful protests. As their plea for reform went in vain, they revoluted by entering into new contracts. Peasants through the Indigo Revolt of 1849 to 60 were able to force the planters to withdraw from northern Bengal. Famines and emigration of Indians to overseas British colonies. Famines as India became increasingly deindustrialized, weavers and artisans engaged in handicrafts were thrown out of employment, and there were recurrent famines due to the neglect of irrigation and oppressive taxation on land. Before the arrival of the British, Indian rulers had ameliorated the difficulties of the populace in times of famines by providing tax relief, regulating the grain prices and banning food exports from famine hit areas. But the British extended their policy of non intervention even to famines. As a result, millions of people died of starvation during the Raj. It has been estimated that between 1770 and 1900, 25 million Indians died in famines. William Digby, editor of Madras Times, pointed out that during 1793 1900 alone, an estimated 5 million people had died in all the wars around the world, whereas in just 10 years, 1891 to 1900, 19 million people had died in India in famines alone. Sadly, when people were dying of starvation, of billions of tons of wheat was exported to Britain during the 1866 Orissa famine, for instance, while a million and a half people starved to death, the British exported 200 million pounds of rice to Britain. The Orissa famine prompted nationalist Dadabai Naoroji to begin his lifelong investigations into Indian poverty. The failure of two successive monsoons caused a severe famine in the Madras presidency during 1976 to 78. The Viceroy Lytton adopted a hands-off approach similar to that followed in Orissa. An estimated 3.5 million people died in the Madras presidency. The introduction of plantation crops such as coffee, tea, and sugar in empire colonies such as Ceylon, Mauritius, Fiji, Malaya, and the Caribbean islands and South Africa required enormous labor. In 1815, the governor of Madras received a communication from the governor of Ceylon asking for coolies to work in the coffee plantations. A Madras governor forwarded this letter to the collector of Tanjavur, who reported that the people were very much attached to the soil, and unless some incentive was provided, it was not easy to make them out of their native soil. But the outbreak of two famines, 1833 to 1843 and 43, forced the people without any incentive from government to leave for Ceylon to work as coolies in coffee and tea plantations for the indentured labor system. The abolition of slavery in British India in 1843 also facilitated the process of emigration to Europe. Empire colonies in 1837, and the number of immigrant Tamil laborers employed in Ceylon coffee estate was estimated at 10,000. The industry developed rapidly and so did the demand for Tamil labor. In 1846, its presence was estimated at 80,000, and in 1855 that 128,000 persons. In 1877, the famine year, there were nearly 380,000 Tamil laborers in Ceylon. Besides Ceylon, many Indians opted to emigrate as indentured labor to other British colonies such as Mauritius, Straits Settlements, Caribbean islands, Trinidad, Fiji, and South Africa. In 1843, it was officially reported that 30,218 male and 4,307 females had entered Mauritius as indentured laborers, whereas by the end of the century, some 5 lakh laborers had moved from India to Mauritius. Education in pre-colonial India was characterized by segmentation along religious and caste lines. Among the Hindus, Brahmins had the exclusive privilege to acquire higher religious and philosophical knowledge. They monopolized the education system and occupied positions in the society primarily as priests and teachers. They studied in special seminaries such as Vidyalayas and Chatuspatis. The medium of instruction was Sanskrit, which was considered a sacred language. Technical knowledge, especially in relation to architecture, metallurgy, etc., was passed hereditarily. This came in the way of innovation. Another shortcoming of the situation was that it barred women, lower caste, and other underprivileged people from accessing education. Emphasis on rote learning was another impediment to innovation. Contribution of colonial state faculty system of education. The colonial government aided the spread of modern education in India for a different reason than educated and empowering the Indians to administer a large colony of India. Like India, the British needed a large number of personnel to work for them. It was impossible for the British to import the educated lot needed in such large numbers from Britain. With this aim, the English Education Act was passed by the Council of India in 1835. T.B. Macaulay prompted the system of education introduced in India. Consequently, the colonial administration started schools, colleges, and universities importing English and modern education in India. Universities were established in Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta in 1857. The colonial government expected this section of educated Indians to be loyal to the British and act as the pillars of the British Raj. T.B. Macaulay was India's first law member of the Governor General General Council from 1834 to 1838. Before Macaulay arrived in India, the General Committee of Public Instruction was formed in 1823 with responsibility to guide the East India Company on the matter of education and the medium of instruction. The committee was split into two groups. The Orientalist group advocated education in vernacular languages. The Anglicist work advocated Western education in English. Macaulay was on the side of the Angles and wrote his famous Minute on Indian Education in 1835. In his minute, he argued Western education in English language his intention began supporting the Anglicists was that he wanted to create a class of persons from India who would be Indian in blood and color, but English in taste and opinion, morals, and in intellect. The British created an educated Indian middle class for their own ends, but sneered at its as the Babu class. The Tory class, however, became the progressive intelligentsia of India and played a leading role in mobilizing the people for the liberation of the country. The role of educated middle class economic and administration was one side, and growth of Western education on the other. That gave the space for the growth of the new social classes. And the new social classes graded by the British Raj included the Indian trading and business communities, large landlords, money lenders, English educated Indians employed in imperial subordinate services, lawyers, and doctors initially adopted a positive approach towards the colonial administration. However, soon they realized that their interests would be better served only in independent India. People of the said social classes began to play a prominent role in promoting satirities among the people. A consciousness of these classes found articulation in a number of associations prior to the founding of the Indian National Congress at the national level. Rajaram Mohan Rai, Chandra Vidyasagar, Swami Vivekananda, Aurobindo Gopala Krishna Gokhale, Dadabhai Naoroji, Firozshah Mehta, Surendranath Banerjee, and others belong to the modern intelligentsia, led the social, religious, and political movements in India, educate Indians exposure to ideas of nationalism, articulated by John Locke, James Stuart Mill, Mazzini, Garibaldi, Rousseau, Thomas Paine, Marx, and other Western intellectuals. The right of a free press, the right of free speech, right of association were the three inheritance rights with which the European counterparts held dear to their art, and the educated Indians to decide to cling to. Various forums came into existence where people could meet and discuss the issues affecting their interests. On the earliest first import Christian missionaries taken up modern education of Indians was created by the India Christian missionaries. One of the methods of missionaries to preach Christianity was through modern secular education. They provided to acquire education under privileged and marginalization for sections who were denied learning opportunities in the traditional education system. However, only a very fast, small fraction converted to Christianity, but the challenge posed by Christianity led to various social and religious reform movements.